My name is Joseph, and I work with Kindred Futures, which is a Black community wealth building organization. And I'm joined here with my colleague, Joni, and we're here to talk to you all about a fresh, hot off the press, you got to get dressed report called The Beloved Community, A Brighter Tomorrow, which is a conversation on climate change and the impact on Black and brown communities in the South. Joni.
Oh, you kicking it to me now?
I'm kicking it to you now.
All right. I'm Joni-Leigh Webster. Just like Joseph said, I work at Kindred Futures. Do a little bit of research, dibble-dabble. So go ahead, Joseph. Let's get this conversation started.
I think what's important to always tell folks is the why. Why are you watching? Why are we here listening? Mm-hmm. The Beloved Community, A Brighter Tomorrow is a call to action, right? Yeah. It's motivated by trying to understand really in an in-depth way how folks are impacted by climate change, mm-hmm. How it impacts their light bill, how it impacts everything else in their wealth building capacities, right? And then specifically situated in Atlanta, where if you look at some of our reports, we find that the wealth gap between Black and white families is 46-1. Mm-hmm. Now, before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of the stats and the interview, you've lived in Atlanta for close to a decade now, right? So you've probably seen some changes in the city, right? Yeah. So when we talk about wealth building, we'll talk about climate. What does that bring up for you?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Brooklyn. But anyway, I'm originally from Brooklyn, and sure. I think the thing about Brooklyn and Atlanta that's most similar to me is how gentrification is not only impacting residents, but we're also seeing a decrease in green space. So, like, there's less trees around because there's more investment into the commercial or real estate infrastructure in the city. And so when I first moved out here, the thing I liked a lot is that unlike a lot of cities, there's so many trees, right? I love looking at trees for some reason.
So do I, yep.
Yeah, it's mad relaxing.
For sure.
And so it's kind of sad to me to see the loss of trees around the city. But kind of like you said, a lot of times we don't think about how that also impacts wealth, because it's not necessarily a natural thought of mine to think of how wealth and greenery connect.
Yep.
And so for me, that's a tremendous loss on so many levels.
For sure. And that connection is what we're going to be talking about a little bit today. Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of it today. So let's situate climate change. I think that's a word that's thrown out all places, right? You know, global warming, all those things. But let's really define climate change so that we can situate ourselves and our audience in a conversation that's going to be very rich, right? So climate change, just basic definition, is just long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns, right?
Yeah.
So what happens when it gets too hot? What happens when it gets too cold? We just had an ice storm here in the South, right?
We haven't.
We're still, I'm always hot though, so, you know, it can be cold outside, but I'm still going to be
cool.
Ice cold.
Yeah.
So that's the definition of climate change.
Yeah.
But what's more particular in the South is that, according to the Southern Environmental Law Center, the effects of climate change, it impacts everyone, but there's disproportionate impacts on Black and brown communities in the South, according to the Southern Environmental Law Center. And when we talk about the generational context that could have for somebody's wealth building capacity, we're going to talk about that with the report. But can you just tell us how we did the report, who we talked to, and what we found?
Yeah, so I think one of the best things about this report is that we talked to people that actually live in the city. We talked to people who lived in predominantly Black neighborhoods in the city of Atlanta, specifically Southwest Atlanta. So we partnered with Atlanta Civic Circle and Neighborhood Nexus, which are local nonprofits that seek to inform community members about what's going on.
For sure.
And how they can improve their lives. And so we talked to over 300 people in the area, and we had one-on-one conversations with residents to learn a little bit more information and provide a lot more context than the survey questions were able to provide. And I think that was what was so amazing about it. Um, a lot of people talked about generational wealth, like
Yeah.
you mentioned,
Yeah.
and it was interesting to see the differences in terms of people who own homes and renters, in terms of what access looked like to generational wealth, and how um, there was a sense that there was like a staying in place to a certain degree.
Like you're not moving forward
Yeah.
because even though you're trying your best, you just are not be able to move forward in your economic capacity.
Yeah. And
Okay.
like for homeowners and renters. So
Right.
we talk about how wealth is oftentimes connected to home ownership,
Right.
and that a lot of the financial assets people have, especially in the US, in terms of moving up financially, tends to come from home ownership.
Right.
But we're not seeing that in Black communities. And it's like, why aren't we seeing that in our communities? What's impacting that?
Yeah. And then one of the things that we find out very distinctively is climate change's role in that, right? So in Southwest Atlanta, according to the CDC, Southwest Atlanta residents are more vulnerable to heat-related illnesses than their peers living in other places in the city, right? When we talk about generational wealth and what it means to have to perhaps spend more money than is required on housing and making sure your home is quote unquote weatherized, we saw that a lot in this research, right? According to some of our survey results, do we want to talk about the surveys? Are we ready to let them know about the survey results and then how we can couch that into the generational conversation? Let me drop this on you.
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
gonna drop this on you. Okay. Hopefully you catch it. All right. And then y'all better go and read so you can catch what I'm dropping as well. 54% of our survey respondents said that they have struggled to pay bills in the past over the last year, utility bills specifically, right? 69% were worried about climate change's impact on their property. Does that really impact wealth building, climate change? I mean, we get it, but can you explicate that a little bit for us?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense when we actually get down to the nitty gritty, especially when we talk about debt, right?
Okay.
And access to home ownership. So a lot of times you have to, quote unquote, go in debt to get access to a home.
Right.
But the difference between Black and white households is that white households may not have to go in as much debt.
Okay.
Or the kind of debt that they have access to is considered good debt.
Okay.
Whereas the kind of debt we have access to tends to lead to even greater financial burdens, right?
Okay.
So we actually, Black people, we tend to actually have less debt in comparison to white people, but it's the kind of debt that we have that's the problem, right? So when you talk about rising utility costs and its connection to weatherization and climate change, it's important to understand how an inability to pay for basic needs like your utility bill can put someone who's in a very precarious or dangerous situation into even more debt, where you have to decide, am I going to feed my family or am I going to pay this utility bill? Am I going to pay this utility bill or am I going to take care of my mortgage, right? And so it's like, how are you able to retain wealth if you do own a home in those kinds of circumstances? And if you don't own a home, if you're a renter, then what does that mean for you? Because you can't necessarily control the quality of the housing that you live in, right?
Absolutely.
Because that's infrastructure. That's your landlord's responsibility. Can you make them change the infrastructure? Can you make them insulate the building so that your utility bill isn't high? And so these are ways that we wouldn't necessarily link climate change to debt, to wealth, but they still impact everyday people.
Yeah.
Everyday Black people.
Everyday Black people disproportionately.
Yeah.
But I'm sure climate change, does impact just regions generally. I think a couple of points that I wanted to kind of jump on is that what we've learned, obviously we interviewed folks too, and what is so interesting about this specific report is that okay, we came and talked about what does climate change do and how it impacts your ability to pay for the bare necessities. Like you said, you pay for one thing here, you may have less to pay for the other things that you need, like food, all those other things. So as we're talking to folks on these interviews, they're like, yeah, but I need like more access to food stamps. Yeah, but I need, assistance with my utilities. Yeah, but I feel like my neighborhood can be a little bit better. It can be more walkable. Yeah, but I feel like I need more money for, to get my blinds right so I can, have less heat coming in during the summer, right? So it's people, and I honestly didn't really grasp how things happening atmospherically can still impact my pockets at the end of the month. That's something that's like really interesting about this study and all other kind of similar kind of conversations that we're having.
Yeah, like to talk about the winter storm that you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
So right now, it's cold. It's really cold in Atlanta, like almost like it's up north. And that means we're using more heat, right? What does that mean when the public infrastructure can't withstand the amount of heat, whether it's related to lighting or it's related to our pipes? And if our pipes are in a precarious condition, and that's something people talked about, right? They talked about different utilities that were impacting their financial security. And so how do we create things that mitigate that impact? Because people are having to not only take care of themselves, but take care of their community members, because it's not just an insulated thing. Like there's a historical background to this that is important to understand. Like our neighborhoods have been disinvested in for decades, since the 1950s. You can go back to the 1950s to redlining and the financial disinvestment that a lot of people in Atlanta have experienced, that you wouldn't think back then that it would have like the ramifications that it does now, but like an energy grid that's out of date, and it's not just Atlanta, it's across the nation. And we're seeing the ramifications of this in this city in particular. It's becoming a big tech hub. We have all these big companies moving here, and then that also creates greater concern. One, because of jobs. Like, are we going to have access to jobs? Are data centers going to provide jobs, or are they going to further strain our the utilities that we do have access to? What does that mean for like our environmental resources? You mentioned flooding. Like, what is that? How's that impacting our access to clean water, and how does flooding play a role in that?
I think there's a lot of really, really good research, not only from the Southern Environmental Law Center, but other kind of similarly oriented organizations that talk about land and where Black people were placed as far as low-lying areas that were more prone to experience flooding during bad weather storms. Something that we haven't talked about really, you mentioned with the data centers and technology moving to the region, is that throughout the conversations we had with certain interview participants, we're talking about the plants that were operating fully around their neighborhoods. Some even talked about a plant in their neighborhood down the street. So how do we really bring this conversation to the forefront around, okay, well, it's not just what's happening in the sky, but it's even what's happening at the street level in your neighborhood. Not only can impact your ability to build wealth, but it can also impact your health, right? Because we talk about health is wealth, right? So in your estimation, how did our interview participants really bring that to life? Some unintentionally, right? Some unintentionally. How do we, that thread between climate, wealth, and then health? As we saw, the CDC said, heat-related diseases are more prone in Southwest Atlanta. So, what do you think about that piece?
Yeah, I think that everything is connected. I think that if you are living in an area with poor infrastructure, and that area is also more populated with industrial plants and so forth, your at risk of pollution, and pollution not only affects your health, but it also affects the environment you're in, especially when we go back to the lack of green space. So then you become sick. So what happens when you become sick and you're not able to work, right? How are you going to maintain your financial standing? And if you can't work, but you need to pay your bills, how are you going to maintain your home? So all these things that seem disconnected are connected to one another. I think someone talked about asthma and like how asthma was an issue in the neighborhood. And it makes sense because you're exposed to all these pollutants. So you can't even, you own a home, but you can't even walk in the neighborhood where your home is at, right? And that's wild to me. Like, you're telling me I can't walk in my neighborhood because my health is not good. And if I wanted to increase my access to food, because you know what, let me figure out a way that I can provide for my family and my community in the absence of access to like grocery stores and fresh fruit. How do you know that the soil isn't polluted, right? And that goes back to the industrial plants. So it's all connected.
It's all connected.
You can't walk because it's too hot outside. Or because you might have asthma because of the environment. And it's sad. You're buying into home ownership to increase your access to wealth, to improve intergenerational experiences so your kids don't have to struggle the way you struggled. But like, how are you really going to even be able to maintain it?
Right. And you know, we're talking. Yeah, we're talking about this. You know, you don't want to get too off topic, but I think what you and I and a lot of people on the Kindred team, and I hope some of our readers see, is that this spirit of resilience. Yet still, but we are still going to, you know what I'm saying, rise up to the occasion and organize within our neighborhood and let folks know, okay, well, you're having difficulties with the utilities, here's a number you can call, right? There's still embedded within some of these difficult experiences a spirit of abundance, right? A spirit of, you know what, these are our circumstances, but we are still going to try and rise above that. Yeah.
Still I rise.
Still I rise. Still I rise.
Amen.
Come on now. So yeah, before we start talking about recommendations and what folks can do, I think that needs to be a part of the conversation as well, is that folks aren't just experiencing life and just letting it happen to them. It's this real motive to say, you know what, now that I know I want to do things differently, or now that I know this is how I can better my circumstances. I don't know, what do you think about that piece?
I think you'll appreciate this as my African brother from the Ivory Coast.
Come on now. Cote d'Ivoire, yes ma'am.
The concept of Ubuntu, which is I am because we are. And I think that was very prevalent in the conversations that we had with people. They talked about access to resources, and some people use their access to formal education to not only inform themselves, but to try to pass that knowledge on to other people. Like, there is a historical legacy that impacts trust among Black people, and there are current situations that impact like elder trust in terms of resources. But the wonderful thing is that there's still this sense of community, and that as long as, if I'm all right, we're all right.
Right.
And like, so people talked about like, loved ones providing them with money to help them make it through the next month. People talked about their church members or themselves and their church members going out and helping to feed people. People talked about the Beltline and Invest Atlanta providing a way for legacy residents to retain their homes despite rises in property taxes. So there's a way that we still showcase resilience and grit, and then also pass it along to everyone around us. But and we're going into your area of expertise, but there still needs to be some measure of incorporating policy to formalize and ensure that this is something that we all have access to.
For sure. Yeah. And the world policy, it's a field and a scope of life that I really enjoy, because everyone's life is impacted by the rules and norms that are set by whatever governing body they're in, right? Like, all these things have rules and laws as you learn as you try to navigate life a little bit. Okay, well, I can't do this in this county, but I can do, right? So that's when you learn that policy is really life, right?
Yeah.
And in this elected democracy, allegedly, we are in charge of those who make decisions, right? Representing democracy. But as you see, some of the decisions that are made perhaps do not always benefit the people that they're supposed to be made for. So that's a great segue to talk about some of the things that we recommended throughout the text. And before I go too far, you got to reach out to your council members at atlantagov.gov. I can't read my own. atlantagA.gov. Chicken scratch is a real thing. That's just recommendations is to write better. So there's a lot of recommendations there, but I'm just going to highlight a couple because I think they weave in very well into the conversation that we've had today. One, overarching one, assistance with utilities, right? Even me personally, I noticed that my heat is on longer than it used to be.
I mean, you're a new homeowner, right?
Yeah, it's like, I like it to be warm, but like the heat is on all night. Like I'm like, this was not the case in November. So right. And thankfully I'm able to cover that. But for those who may not have choices to make, so how do we call on policymakers to really engage with our energy companies to say, okay, well, how do we mitigate some of these gaps that our certain low to moderate income citizens are experiencing? I think home weatherization is another thing that we recommended insofar as there are programs that are available at the federal level that gets distributed to states for states to help qualifying people have access to weatherization, meaning appliances and tools that are going to be able to keep your home in a stable state even when climate changes. Right now, there are some restrictions based on income, but I think what we did propose is to maybe loosen up some of those guidelines on income, because while a certain pocket of population may meet those income requirements, me making $1 more doesn't mean that my need is less than those who met the income criteria, right? So what is it like to expand those programs so that more folks can have access to it is another thing that we said. And then another thing that I wanted to bring up is just mitigating harmful environmental exposure, right? I think federally now we're seeing a lot of movement away from environmental restrictions on big tech, on manufacturing, right? As you said, one of our interviewees talked about things that are happening in her neighborhood, right? But meanwhile, we're having less restrictions on those things. So that's something that we recommended is for additional regulations on having plants in our neighborhoods. Yeah. So
as our resident expert, Joseph, why did you choose those specific policies? Like, what made them stand out to you?
Yeah, I think in grad school we had this matrix that we used when we talked about policy. It was feasibility. It was like who's going to be the stakeholder in charge for getting this policy across, and those big bucket items is what really I look at when I decide, okay, well, what's going to make the most sense to recommend as a policy analyst. So the home weatherization program, I always wanted to look at like what is already existing, right? Because it's easier to expand on something that's already present than it is to create a whole new policy that's going to just overturn something that's already been happening, right? If we look at true watershed moments in American politics and even regional politics, they happen very seldomly, right? So what is it to say to lawmakers, hey, you know what, you don't even have to do anything new. It's just we're seeing a need. Thank you for already having this on the books. But how do we expand it to, get more folks to have access to some of these benefits that this policy could garnish? So that's how I look at the policymaking spaces What can I work with that's already there? And I know some other colleagues are a little bit more imaginative, but I think, pragmatism is my strategy that I use when I do policy recommendations. And again, assistance for utilities, we've already seen that happen, right? Even I lived in North Carolina, Duke Energy, or even Southern Company, they have certain programs that are happening at the municipal level for folks to get access to help with utilities. So what does it look like to actually expand that at the county level and then maybe at the state level? Because in Georgia, there's preemption. So a lot of these policies have to come at the legislative body. So what does it look like to have this conversation happening? So that's what prompted me to kind of want to lead with this, and then obviously as a team, we decided to choose certain ones. Yeah,
I think that's great because I think we had that Public Service Commission election that shifted a lot of things, and I think the onus for shifting things was, like you mentioned, the high utility costs and trying to make sure that the Public Service Commission was enacting policies that safeguarded Georgians. And so it was and is great to see how people are able to engage civically and to also see the responsiveness of some lawmakers to ensure that maybe, data centers do need to pay taxes in order to be in the area. Maybe there does need to be a limit or a cap on how much utility companies can charge people.
Yeah, I think data centers is even though we didn't cover that in a long breath in our report, in the general ecosystem around some of the Black community wealth building and wealth building conversations generally is that conversation around data centers, especially in the South, right? We're seeing, we're finally learning about the environmental harms that come with having data centers, while municipalities also do need that tax base that comes with having a project like that. So, how do we hold both of those balls in the air? But right now, as far as our task is concerned, we're more so looking at mitigating environmental harm. So, we need to really have a stronger conversation around regulations for data centers. I think what we do know is that the federal government is very much invested in AI being the U.S. being a primary player in AI and in all that space. So unfortunately, we may see some data centers, but we are seeing some regional governments and even some state lawmakers even starting to talk about, okay, we need to maybe rein it in a little bit more, as people who are on the ground in these neighborhoods are actually like fighting back and are voting no on new, even in places that need, quote unquote, the economic plug. They're still saying, you know what, well, we want to do it another way. So
it's really exciting to see. So it's good to see people getting activated, and kind of like the people that we talk to really rely on one another to make sure that things do change and change for the better.
Yeah, for sure. So, a beloved community, a brighter tomorrow is, like we said at the top, is a call to action, is a call to strive to have an environmentally safe, spiritually safe, and an emotionally safe Atlanta for all residents, right? So, and that's what we really try to bring forth in our report. So we hope that you engage with it, that you share, that whatever highlights you find, that you maybe contact us to have a more in-depth conversation. And anything you want to say for the good of the order?
Yeah, follow us on all platforms.
At Kindred Futures, we're
my bad.
All platforms.
So remember kindredfutures.org. And all social media platforms.
Right. Yeah. Show love. It's the Brooklyn way,
It is the Brooklyn way.
Come on.